very nasty indeed. It was called George Yard back in those days, that street, and today it's called Gunthorpe Street. You might have seen as we came in. Now, a few days later, over in the Tower of London, have you all had your sightseeing tour? I appreciate you haven't, no? Sightseeing tour. Okay. Do you know what the Tower of London is? You heard of the Tower of London? Have you seen the Tower of London?
Heard of it.
Lots of torturing going on there over the years, absolutely. It's been a palace, a prison, a fortress, a place where they kept the crown jewels, still do. And because of all those things, it's always had soldiers based there. So a few days after Martha's murder, there was an inspection parade happening in the Tower of London, but it was no ordinary inspection parade because the soldiers were all lined up, but they didn't have their hats on. They didn't have their jackets on because it was a murder ID. And Pearly Pole is in there, clocking the faces of every single soldier. I'm skipping over the girls, obviously. There were no girl soldiers back then. Trying to recognise the man. Not many guys, is there? Well, there's one as well. Excellent. Trying to recognise the man she thought she'd seen going off with her friend a few days beforehand. Now, sadly, she was not able to ID anybody, and today we see the murder of Martha as a background murder to the Jack the Ripper case, in so much as now it is not officially attributed to Jack the Ripper. But at the time it wasn't seen as a background murder. At the time it was seen as a continuation of the Whitechapel murders, because there had been a few before, going on in the area of Whitechapel, obviously. Committed not by Jack the Ripper, he did not yet have that name, but committed by the Whitechapel murderers. So the name Jack the Ripper would come about during the investigation. Now, are you aware that in the City of London, over in the financial district, which we're going to be walking into very, very soon, there is an old Roman wall that encircles the city? Are you aware of that? It used to be there, it still is there in parts, it's almost 2,000 years old, and like I said, that is the financial district today, that is downtown. And for the last few hundred years, the City of London has had its own mayor, it's had its own government, and for the purposes of the walk tonight, it has its own police force. City of London police force over there. Here, in this part of London, it's the Metropolitan Police, and they police Greater London. And today they get on, they share information, they work together to catch the bad guys. But back in the days of 1888, they loathed each other. They were in competition with each other. They hid evidence from each other. And we'll see how Jack the Ripper knew this and took full advantage of this. This is relevant, and I mention these two police forces because one of the murders took place within the City of London. Apparently, I only discovered last year, very excited to discover new things, but we are the only city in the world, apparently, with two distinct police forces. Oh, does anyone know, so I mentioned one murder in the City of London. How many murders were there in all? Do we have any idea how many murders there were?
7.
You said 5. You said 5. Interesting. Interesting. 5. Okay. Okay.
I thought it was like more in the teens.
More in the teens, yeah. More in the teens we have here, you know. Little bit dark, but ooh, exciting, atmospheric. Possibly, but we're not 100% sure, obviously, are we? Because we don't know who he is, so we can't be 100% sure, obviously, how many he killed. But if we're looking at modus operandi, the way that he actually killed them, we're definitely talking about 5. Very good, 5 indeed, yeah. So those are the 5 I will concentrate on tonight. I'm just looking around at a few faces. I'm seeing a few disappointed faces with this relatively low number of 5. Is that correct? Were some people expecting more?
No, it was horrific.
A few. It was indeed horrific, absolutely. A few people expecting more than that. Well, sorry about that. Not much I can do about the number of victims. But that being the case then, why is it that Jack the Ripper is so well known today? If it was the relatively low number of 5, what's the big deal? He was never caught, so it remains the greatest unsolved murder mystery case of all time. Absolutely right, yep.
And he was said to have surgical knowledge and was cutting out the women's sexual organs.
He was certainly cutting out the women's organs generally, just sort of vital organs all round, but you've hit the nail on the head with regard to the sheer ferocity of the attacks. The extremity of the violence used was absolutely unseen previously. Nothing had ever happened like this before. The third reason he's such a big deal today is he wasn't the first serial killer. Some people think he was, but he certainly was the first serial killer to be covered by the newspapers to such a large extent. And this was at a time when literacy rates were going through the roof, we will see how the press in particular were very unethical, very naughty.